Once upon a time there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Welcome to The Preacher and the Pagan. I'm Deb Bodwin from the United States, and I've got with me...
I'm Deb Suttard from sunny Canada, and we've got a guest this week.
Welcome,
Kat.
Hi, Kitty.
Hi.
This is Catherine Gordon. She is a pagan. She is actually our producer / editor, and she's also my wife of 22 years.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made it, Kat.
Thank
We
you.
have an entire episode to talk about paganism, and as a Christian, I don't know that much about the tradition, and I think a lot of Christians, or a lot of people who grew up in a Christian milieu, don't really know what paganism is. So, what is it? Is it one thing? Is it many things? What is it?
It's a lot of things. I told you when we started recording that I was nervous. I think one of the things I'm nervous about is there are no definitive answers to these questions.
Okay, well, that's kind of faith anyway. We like to pretend we have answers, but we really don't. So you said there's a lot of differences and a lot of similarities. So come at us. What is paganism? How varied is it?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that saying the word paganism is a little like saying the word Christian.
Right.
So you've got all kinds of different paths underneath that umbrella, just like you have Catholicism, Baptist, fill in the blank underneath Christian.
Right. That's fair. Okay, so we're dealing with an umbrella term.
Yes.
Yeah. And as you're going to put a Seventh-day Adventist and a Unitarian in the same place and have two very different understandings of Christians, it's the same thing with pagans. You put a Dianic and a Druid together, you're going to have very different, and these are just terms that are shorthand terms for different paths that people follow.
So what are they? A Druid I've heard. I've got enough Celtic heritage to know that one, but Dianic, can you explain what these terms mean?
Dianic groups tend to be centered around women's spirituality.
Okay.
And when they do include men, the men tend to be secondary.
So Dianic is usually a very female focused, feminist, matriarchal structure.
It's kind of an answer to years and years and years of patriarchy.
That's fair. Yeah.
And while not all Dianics are like this, quite a few Dianics.
Your wife is borderline Dianic. Be careful.
I said quite a few, not all, tend to want a female only space. They don't want to include men. It's not that they haven't, I don't know. I can't speak for them because I am not a Dianic. But
actually, I am like that. I prefer an all-female space.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily even a bad thing, because I know as a Christian woman, we separate and do women's things without men around, and it's a different energy. It's very special to have that kind of thing, because men kind of change the dynamic a lot.
Yes, they do, and the problem is a lot of former Christians, women, because they could not find those spaces to explore feminine aspect of spirituality, a lot of former Christian women are drawn to paganism because there is a lot of opportunity to explore the feminine side of spirituality.
Yeah. That's something that we as a tradition have really failed in. We can't help people find their place. So I understand there's there's goddess, but there's more. Like, what does everybody follow a goddess or a group of gods, or how does that work?
Okay, here's the first rule of paganism: never use the word everybody.
Okay. All right. So there's no standard. It's just everybody doing what they feel is
Well,
their
it's
their
the
call
path
to.
you follow a path. With Christianity, a lot of people are taught Christianity or Judaism or whatever faith they practice. Quite a few of them are born into families that follow that path, because the pagan traditions of present day are a lot more recent.
Although there are fam tribes.
There are fam tribes, but for the most part, most people come to paganism on their own, pulling away from another form of faith.
And you have to remember that what you're saying is kind of outdated. That was the
I'm an
case
old person.
20, 30 years ago. But now that paganism has been around and out so long, they're becoming more and more pagan, more and more family traditions, because people who came to it the way you're talking about it have now aged and are having children and
Right.
teaching their
So-
children, or becoming grandparents whose children are now teaching their grandchildren.
And that is true.
So there is family stuff going on, which makes complete sense. And
Yeah.
then there's a lot of individual stuff and a lot of people migrating from what we call the mainline traditions into something that's more organic and flexible.
Yes, because a lot of it, and a lot of what I have seen in paganism, and believe me, I am not by far an authority on all paganism, but what I've seen is a lot of it is an inside out situation where you are drawn to the faith is not drawn to you. In other words, you find that connection. And I'm what's called an eclectic pagan. I am the scrappy, I'm the raccoon searching through the trash of paganism, basically, and finding what fits, anything shiny that fits my needs. But that's because that's who I am as a person. I need to have the diversity of thought and ideas. There are a lot of people who are absolutely drawn to very ritualistic, hierarchical, wonderfully beautiful forms of paganism.
So what would hierarchy look like? Hierarchy kind of dictates leaders. Is there learning programs and stuff that kind of like the equivalent of those of us who went through seminary? Do they exist?
There are teaching covens.
Okay. And coven is what, a group of women, I guess, primarily. It's what I understand it to
Not
be.
always women.
Okay.
It's a group of practitioners who choose to come together and worship and practice together.
Okay. And do they do
Church.
They obviously have rituals and they have roles, and like this would suggest that they what do people I'm trying to find the question here.
How do
You go to
become a
these
preacher?
learning covens and you work together, and then you go off, and like, or is this just an in group that stays together and learns together?
It's very much like a church congregation.
Can you give an example of the teaching covens that you were part of? What that looked like for you as a student, and what the path to accelerate through that would have been?
When I was a part of a teaching coven, there were 3 degrees possible, and each degree was you took 1 year and a day in each level, and you learned deeper and deeper mysteries as you went. Now, what's interesting to my mind in most teaching covens is you learn the basics, and then the second degree is coming to a deeper understanding of those basics. So Gemini, help me.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like you start off with a very surface level, and then each level that you proceed,
Like a spiral,
is a spiral going deeper and deeper. Now, what in a teaching coven, at one point would you become a priestess and be able
So there are
to
titles that go
coven?
along with the various levels.
that's the interesting thing about covens, about priestesses. Depending on what you're in charge of, you may have had formal education or you may have had no education at all. There is a
Okay.
belief that all solitaries are priestesses in their own path. You may have been practicing solo for years and decide that you're going to form a coven. And once you form that coven, you're the priestess.
Oh, so essentially starting your own church kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, you're not. I mean, I don't know a lot of covens that are filing for tax-free status.
I've known several.
Well, yeah,
Well,
that's
I mean,
true.
I would think some big ones would, but no. It's hard to say because so much of this is Wild West in terms of religion as compared to, say, oh, I don't know, Hindu or some of these older religions. We're kind of the Wild West, just like the first century Christians were. There are people who are like Paul, who are trying to tell everybody how to do it, and everybody is kind of like, if we want people to tell us how to practice our faith, we'll go to one of the old ones.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned Paul, because that goes right back to the very, very earliest documentation that Christians have. What books and such do pagan groups use? I mean, a lot of the stuff was prehistorical from what I understand, and a lot of it was stuff passed down, and I'm not sure how well preserved stories have been. What's the take on that?
Well, first of all, you're not going to find any well-published book like the Bible. That's not going to happen. A lot of information. Let's talk about Gardner. Gardner started what people usually think of as Wicca today.
That was Gerald Gardner. He's an Englishman in the 1950s.
Okay, the 50s.
And Wicca is the largest, most popular group of pagan.
Now, if I can interject right here, a little bit of history. Now, Gardner went public with his religion. It was very high ritual in the 1950s. The reason that became public was because it wasn't until the 1950s in England that witchcraft was no longer illegal. It was still technically on the books until 1950.
It's still on the books in some places.
In some places, it's still on
even
the
in
books.
America.
Yeah. So
that's
how long they had been practicing this in secret, we don't know. As highly ritualized as it came out, my guess is they had been practicing for a while.
But archaeology does show some form of goddess or a multi-deity worship all the way back as far as we can find.
And a lot of people will draw on that history and their understanding of those ancient religions, and they will form that into their modern. There is actually a group, an actual group in Greece that is trying to revive the Hellenic religion, and they are practicing Hellenics in Greece, worshiping the old Hellenic gods, which are the Olympic gods, Zeus, Hera, that group.
Well, it's interesting. Because archaeologically, as much as I know, a lot of that stuff was not written down. So they're having to regroup from statuary and oral comments and letters and
books of shadow.
People would write down books of spells and healing elixirs and that sort of thing.
Common earth wisdom,
things like, using I don't know,
planting underneath the new moon,
that
harvesting
sort of thing,
underneath the waxing.
Things that would wind up in a farmer's almanac,
right, folklore kind of things
and
that we perceive today. Okay.
Those were like the basis for what's considered a book of shadow. Book of Shadows is a collection of spells and recipes and wisdom that is used as a guide for the practitioner and is quite often passed out from family to family member.
And so the families would create their own?
Yes.
Okay.
A witch can create her own book of shadows.
Most witches today actually create their own book of shadows. It's a way to keep track of everything you've learned. It's like you might have a collection of your grandmother's recipes.
Right.
So let's
Okay.
say you write a ritual for, I don't know, a new baby coming in, and you've created this ritual to bless the new baby, and you want this to become a family tradition in your house. So you would write down that ritual, and then every time a new baby would be born into the family, you would gather together and do that ritual, and it would go down from generation to generation. So these are things that,
But it's also a good way of remembering, okay, well, I want to welcome this new family member and I've come up with this. And I want to remember this for the next time there's a new family member so I can do it.
exactly.
Again, exactly.
So,
the
but
same
it's
way.
written down so anybody can do it who has access to that book of shadows.
Oh, that's neat. That's
It's
a really
like
strong family
a
tradition.
guidebook.
Yeah.
But she did ask the question, and this is something I
Oh.
really want to recommend for Christians who are interested. If I were going to recommend one book for Christians who are interested in paganism, I would read The Truth About Witchcraft Today by Scott Cunningham.
So, what's in the book, Cap, that that you think we Christians should read about? Because remember, Christians are fairly ignorant of a lot of other people's traditions. So,
Right.
what could this teach us?
Well, what I like about this particular book is that it's not written for pagans, it's written for the lay people. It's written for people whose family members are pagan, or who suddenly heard about a coworker who's pagan, or maybe they're a little frightened.
Hmm.
It's kind of a what pagans are, what pagans aren't.
Yes.
This is what our practice looks like. This is what our faith looks like. This is what we look like when we're
Well, that's so
practicing.
fascinating.
Scott
That is a
Cunningham.
great recommendation.
Yeah, his books are really good. Now, unfortunately, he died many years ago, so they may be a little outdated, but as a general introduction into what pagans believe and how they worship, it's a really good foundation. And he's very, very gentle and non-judgmental.
And very
So,
straightforward and very plain spoken.
yeah, so a person who's scared, who's reading it, is not going to feel like they're being lectured to.
And it's one of the few books I know that's written to non-pagans about paganism.
So, what do you, in a snapshot, what do you wish Christians knew about pagans, like the entire umbrella or the part that you occupy?
The devil isn't our creation.
We don't worship him. We don't even believe in him.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because I think that's like we talked about this earlier in the series. This whole notion of the devil is actually really it's only a portion of people in any tradition that actually believe in that kind of thing. The majority of that tradition doesn't, and so accusing paganism of being the focus, I think that accusation comes from a very narrow part of of the Christian tradition, part that I'm not part of, for sure.
I think that's also a cultural issue. You'll find that a lot more prevalently in the United States where we are.
Yay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Which is unfortunate because it's quite ignorant.
Yes, well, yeah. I think as far as I'm concerned, what I'd like for non-pagans to know about paganism is that it's so much more complicated than what you're going to see represented in television.
Oh God, we are not charmed.
We're not charmed.
We're not Samantha. We don't wiggle our nose and magical things, move from one spot to the other. And we don't think it works that way either.
And we're not out sitting there putting curses on people. And now I will say there are some who will put curses, but
but every religion has their bad apples.
Every religion has their bad apples. Most pagans understand the flow of energy, which means what you put out into the world will come back to you. And I like to think most pagans are smart enough to know that if you put negative out into the world, negative is going to come back to you.
A lot of pagans believe in the threefold rule, which is the idea that whatever you do comes back to you threefold. I don't believe in that. The way I look at it is you can't cast magic without the energy and the residue of that magic getting attached to you. Like you can't funnel Kool-Aid through a tube without the Kool-Aid coating the tube.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does, but magic doesn't. I'm
Okay, honey.
I'm curious about what that is and what that means.
Magic is, let's come back to the secret. Do you believe that what we think has the ability to bring things to us?
The law of attraction. Are you familiar with that term?
That's pretty loaded for a Christian, really, because there's ample evidence both ways in our faith. So it's one of those things, is like putting your finger on a bubble. So I'm going to leave that as an open question.
Okay.
How's that for not answering?
Well,
I think there is something to it. I'm just not sure what.
Fair.
Magic is using every tool at your disposal to amplify that, though. That's magic. Causing
so
things to happen in the conformity of your will.
Okay, so tools like what?
Me personally, I like using candle magic, which
Okay.
basically means I light a candle, I focus on what I want, I create a chant because that helps raise energy, and you gather it all, then you release it at the end towards bringing about whatever you're trying to change. It's magic is the concept that you can change the world using the energy inside each human.
Okay. Kind of, I guess, kind of like some people approach prayer in our tradition.
Mhm.
But how does, like, do you feel you see results
Yes.
in
Oh,
that? Do you
yes.
do stories? Okay, tell me about them.
Okay, how
What
about
about
the
me?
woman lying right next to me that I married 22 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
What-
I was very, very lonely. And so I cast a spell for love. And I had a very set list of things that I wanted.
An impossible unicorn of lists that she wanted.
And within a year, she was in my life. Now,
Wow.
important here, I believe in love magic. I do not believe in directed love magic.
So you believe the option is possible, but you can't target a person individually.
Right.
That is very, very bad to do, because basically what you're doing is you're imposing your will on them magically.
Which in my
Mhm.
opinion is no better than
Right.
a physical assault.
Right.
But
So you can't, you can put up the general suggestion, but you're not going after an individual
Right.
person in all of that.
So let me put it in a metaphoric way. Imagine you've got some water, right? And on the other side of that pool of water, there is a little object that you want. Okay. Now you can sit there and try to reach for it, or you can just put your finger in the water near you and just start swirling the water to create waves. Eventually, those waves are going to expand and naturally bring that object to you. It may take a little while, but that's the same thing you're doing with energy. You see an object or something that you want, you know it exists. You know the universe doesn't care if you have it or not. It's like, yeah, it's cool. So what you're doing is you're manipulating the energy of the universe to bring that to you. And unlike Samantha Stevens on Bewitched, it doesn't automatically come to you. It takes will, it takes time, it takes intent.
Patience.
And patience. It takes patience.
Faith.
And faith. Because what happens when you want that ball on the other side of the water, you start swirling the water, but it doesn't come to you. If you don't believe it's going to work, you stop. And that ball stays where it is.
Or it's kind of like taking two fingers and one is moving in the right direction in order to bring it. The other is subconsciously twiddling around and messing up the pattern.
Okay.
So this is a discipline we're talking about.
It's definitely discipline. It's faith. It's persistence. She cast that spell for me, like 3 times, and waited. And
For a year.
There was really no reason she and I ever should have met.
Because she was in Arizona and I was in Kentucky.
And online, we traveled in very, very different circles, but there was one little tangential point where we met. And after a year of casting that spell, those points met and we met, and boom, 22 years later, we're together. So you can say it's coincidence or you can say it's magic. That's what you want to believe. But we're
the
perfect for each
things
other
that-
and not on paper.
The things that I have cast for have consistently happened frequently enough that coincidence becomes less and less likely in my mind. Once is a coincidence. Almost every time, that's something else.
Yeah,
And-
and probably do you as group, I mean, would, if something like that happens with us, we kind of drill down on it a little bit. And us, by the way, I'm talking like theological nerds. I'm not talking the
Mhm.
average person. So do you spend time kind of drilling down, like why did this happen? How did this happen? Or do you just leave it as a grand life mystery and carry on? Well, I guess I'm just wondering, like, do you share this then with your community, or if you have one, and talk about it more? And like for us, an experience like that would be something we'd bring back to the group, and we'd share about the wonders of God, and
Okay,
that this
I
can
get it.
happen.
We're doing that with you right now. You know?
Okay, so this, it's part of everyday conversation then, if you have a receptive audience.
Yes. With some people, there's a belief in remaining silent because just as I have energy that's capable of reaching out and affecting change, so do the people around me.
And what would be the reason to keep quiet in that situation?
Because you never know when somebody's going to get petty and jealous.
Or you never know when you might accidentally influence someone else's. I find that a lot of times what will happen is
I'm more worried about petty and jealous.
at least in Kat and I's situation, because we are not part of a coven, we are very receptive when people ask us. We're not going to go out and just shove it in your face, because that's not really what we do.
Right.
We're not these overt people that are,
Very few pagans are evangelistic.
well, and the thing is, because you find the path doesn't find you.
Although a lot of people say that when they discover paganism, that they've always been this, they just didn't have the word for it.
Exactly.
So
So
I can see that.
what I think, I believe personally, is that when the person needs to find me, they'll find me. And they do, they always do. It's sometimes a Christian who just really wants to understand, or sometimes it's a pagan who doesn't know they're a pagan, or sometimes it's a Christian who thinks they're a pagan and says, wait, no, this isn't me. But I think, in my opinion, the universe, the gods, always they bring the teacher to us in ways that if we try to do it ourselves, it's never quite as effective. So I think when people need to hear it, they ask us and we tell them.
Right. I think
But I'm not going
that's
to evangelize, because that's not our calling.
right. And I think I'm seeing overlaps of some Christian expressions, and I think that's one of the reasons to have these conversations, is to more people to see that we're not really that different. We, as my father used to say, you might put the wrong emphasis on the other syllable, but you're not really spelling it any differently, which I think is kind of cool.
I like that.
Pat, something you mentioned a while back ago was rituals. What kind of rituals do you partake in, or do others do? I know the
Girl,
wheel of life is something that a lot of us are familiar with the various seasons and such.
I'm going to turn this over to Kat, because I was raised Catholic. I gave up ritual for Lent. Thank you. Kat, do talk.
Hold on.
Sorry.
I'm just trying to figure out how many Lent you gave up, different methods and forms of Catholicism before you were finished.
Quite a few from what I'm reckoning. We're coming into spring now. What kind of rituals would be happening around this time?
Around this time, we're getting ready to hit Ostara,
Which Ostara,
which is pagan Easter. It's
Okay.
instead of, well, about it being about the crucifixion and the resurrection. No, it's about, well, it is about the resurrection of the earth. It's about the dead of winter giving way to the new life of spring.
Same theme, different actors. Death and
Well,
rebirth.
there's certainly a lot of rituals or connections there.
Yeah. And you mentioned the wheel of the year, and just recently in our Easter episode, we talked about the Christian year being, it's symbolic of a life, birth, growth, death, etc., of a person, Jesus. Well, the pagan is symbolic of a life, of a year, the birth, the growth, the harvest, and then the eventual death of the year. So it's very similar, and it follows that same trajectory. It starts in spring, goes through summer, then fall, then the dead of winter, and then the rebirth in spring. And our holidays are designed around that wheel based on what is going on in the year. Since most of the traditions are based on agrarian past, it's going to have a connection to planting and harvesting and storing and preparing.
Okay, question for you. I'm sitting here looking out my window as the snow is disappearing quickly and the days are warming up. What happens in Australia? Because they've got the opposite.
They tend to flow in the other direction. So, oh God, I'm bad at holding numbers in my head. Whatever is opposite on the wheel of Ostara, so probably Samhain, but I'm not positive, would be what they're celebrating right now. They separate we say the wheel of the year goes clockwise for us, they go counterclockwise.
Okay.
So it is very adaptable. And we live in the city. We're not going to go out and plant things because, well, there's not a lot of our lawn is made of rocks. I mean,
well, you are in the desert.
We are in the
That's
desert.
what planter boxes are for.
I know. But the thing is, if you live in a place like Canada, where we're typical Ostara, whether you're going to be
I'll tell you, having lived in Kentucky, which is as close as I can get to Canada, where there was ice and snow, like Deb was just talking about, that makes you appreciate that change all the more.
I can believe it.
Because everything stops freezing and things start getting warmer.
Right. And I think that's something that one of the things that really, as a historian, really bothers me is this assumption that Christians stole other traditions. That's not how tradition works. But one of the things that we can appreciate, and I think we should talk about and share openly, is, in a lot of Northern cultures, we experience all these things at the same time through our lenses, but they're still the same things. Like spring is when newness of life comes, regardless of what ritual tradition you subscribe to. And I think that there's a beautiful connection there, rather than talking about stole and lost and whatever else, but coming together to celebrate the fact that we both look at certain things with a similar eye, even if we use different language for it.
Can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
I think we have to remember a couple of things when it comes to I really like the discussion that you guys had in a prior episode, which we'll link in the notes, about how two communities coming together and things blend instead of being stolen. Now, I want you to understand where a lot of that animosity is coming from that makes pagans use the words like stolen. I think things are very different where you are than where we are. And like I said, I appreciated that concept of that conversation because it's important. But I think that the accusations come from a place of rage, because at least in America, things that they were borrowed or did start with us and then come over and get shared and get integrated will be claimed as, how do I say this?
As Christian.
As Christian. It's not, we're mad because we feel like you
stole
assimilated some of our beliefs on one hand, which would be fine, Not you. That's not fair. I'm not talking about you, Deborah Sutton, or even Christians in Canada, because it sounds like it's very different, but a lot of Christians here. But on one hand, you take these things, and another, you look down on us, or you
Call us evil.
or in some extreme cases, you put us in the hospital. Because I've been put in the hospital by a Christian because I was pagan.
That is not right.
And
I'm
that's
sorry.
that a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of people come to paganism with a lot of baggage and a lot of pain from their experiences as a Christian. And unfortunately, it's the same with people who become atheists because they have a lot of baggage and they become anti-Christian or anti-religion. And unfortunately, a lot of them are very vocal and very convincing, and they will come in and they have their agenda. Our agenda is very different, you and I. Our agenda is not to
Yes.
say that one is right or one is wrong. Our agenda is to open up that dialogue and to say that
Well,
everyone has
exactly.
a place.
And to blow some holes through some assumptions.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons I appreciate my relationship with you, Deb, is because I'm learning that not everything is like the experiences I've had over here.
Well,
I think it's one of the reasons why when you asked if we could do something focusing on paganism, I got so excited because there is not a whole lot of conversation. And Christians, well, the Christian groups that I'm part of are really big on interreligious dialogue. And we have a lot of going on with Jewish folks and with Muslim folks, and not quite so much with Hindus and Buddhists, but it's there. But there's not really any good conversation with Wiccans. I mean, the last time I remember seeing anything in the news that connected Christians and Wiccans were when a Wiccan a chaplain, either a hospital or prison chaplain, was let go, and the Christians came in and said, "No, we need this person. They shouldn't lose their position just because they've got a smaller group of people. That group still needs her." That's the last thing I remember seeing in the news about
for them.
You make
Wiccans
me
and
wanna move to
Christians coming
Canada.
together.
Shush, too cold.
Because the last story I heard like that from America was a woman getting fired for being pagan and trying to help reach out to the kids around her in the hospital she was at. So very different
Yeah,
countries.
see, I think that's one of the things that, and I think it's one of the things that keeps coming up and again, and is that a lot of the negative version of Christians, and I'm very familiar with our 2000 years history, I'm not going to dismiss it, but a lot of current assumptions about what Christians are come out of the American South, and
Yeah.
they're not everybody's expression of it. And that's something we like to kind of remind you. You guys live right in the middle of it. I don't. So
as a
I have something
Southern
else to
United
bring.
States native, I want to apologize to the world. I mean, we have
I didn't tell them to act like that.
we have so much good to offer. I just, unfortunately, the most negative of it seems to be the biggest thing that people see, especially outside of the country. And I'm so sorry about that. But, and that's
But
the
it gives
thing
us an
that,
opportunity to converse a little bit more.
okay. When I was in Kentucky, some of the best, most interested people I met were conservative Christians because they were curious, but also some of the most horrifically prejudiced people were also conservative Christians who were absolutely certain I was slitting kitty throats and, drinking their blood and all sorts of horrible things that I would never do because I'm a
Which I was
vegetarian.
going to say I have no problem with, as long as you're not attacking other people's pets. If you eat meat, you have no right to judge.
Fair enough. But
Okay,
that's not something every pagan does. That's not something most pagans do, in my opinion.
No, that's much more Santeria, hoodoo, voodoo.
Yeah, but again, that falls under the umbrella. So there is some
does it? Is that
voodoo and
because
all
I'm
that.
not familiar with how big the umbrella is.
It's big. It's very big. Voodoo, all that would fall technically under the pagan.
That
But
kind of thing is a little bit trickier because it's a blend of the Haitian with the Catholic, like the Catholicism.
Yeah, they are their own people. And the thing is,
Right.
it's a very old and deep religion,
A very beautiful
and
religion.
beautiful. And I know very little about it except that it is not for me, and I respect the practitioners of that religion. It's just not something that I'm called to. So, but it's that's the thing with most pagan religions. They try to be respectful of each other,
Yes.
even if the practices
Are
are
different.
extremely different and incompatible with each other. We try to, and it's not easy because we're all humans and we're all imperfect. And sometimes there is infighting amongst different groups and all of that, but it's just like any
But that's less
group.
of an overall religion versus religion thing and more of a Betty Sue Bob doesn't like Angela Doodad.
Right. And that's in every tradition.
Exactly.
So I think we gotta wrap this up because I think we're gonna need another conversation because there's so much here. But before we go, there's one thing I would like to know as a mom, and I realize that's my experience and not yours. But if we were to talk to children to help the next generations be more open-minded, where would you point as a really good place to start for kids and families to just kind of understand our neighbors?
I would have to look something up on that because I know there are resources out there for raising Wiccan children or raising pagan children. I think honestly the best thing
But
to,
she's not talking about race. She's
No.
talking about helping with open.
I'm thinking what I would suggest is there is a website called religiostolerance.org. I believe that's the website for it. And it's a pretty much a treasure trove of information on different types of religion. I think that may be a good starting point for a parent who wants to understand this and wants tools to share with their kids. Um, the other thing is just being open to asking questions. And if you know someone who's pagan, that helps.
Yes.
you know.
Mhm.
But religiostolerance.org is a good start. And BeliefNet.
Can I come at it from a place a little less intellectual?
Of course.
Mhm.
To my understanding of children and the children I've been around, most of them don't come at the world from a place of hate and intolerance to start with. So I would say
Mhm.
the best place to start is not to teach your children to hate anything
Right.
because
Which
they don't learn
is
that
the
unless we
premise of
teach it.
every religion, whether
Mhm,
it's practiced or not, that every religion has that as a principle.
Yeah,
mhm. See,
there you go.
There you go.
Um,
Don't teach by example either.
it also might be fun to point out little things like Ostara, right? And Easter. That's where the Easter bunny
Mhm.
comes from.
Yes, yes, that's so important, especially for Christian kids who get confused about wonder what a bunny's doing with the resurrected
Mhm.
God.
Mhm.
But see, for pagans, bunnies are a representation of fertility and growth. So it's a symbol of the return of life once again at the end of winter. But taking the fun parts and introducing children to things that they're already used to, like the Easter Bunny, and how that ties in, is also a good way to start getting them used to the idea of paganism and being open minded and appreciative of another point of view.
And
That's I can see parallels being drawn by how Christians try to talk to kids around in December about Hanukkah and Diwali.
well, yeah,
We just
I
need
would,
to make it a little more normal.
and just remind them, kids, that yes, this is the basis of the celebration. This is the reason we do it, but it's also a community celebration. It's our community, and as there are different types of people in our community, not all of them follow our religion, but a lot of the things that they do are really welcome and help us enjoy our holidays more too. So we represent those in our holidays too. The tree, the lights, the candles, all of those come from different places. And as our ancestors worshiped these situations and they joined with their neighbors, they brought in their neighbors' traditions as well, and they became our traditions.
Yeah, it's a really, really good message.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Kat, we're going to have you back to talk a little bit about this more when we get some more questions in my boodle bag to offer to you. But thank you so much for this time.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, my
Good. I
darling.
really appreciate this, and I hope our listeners come up with other questions too that can help
Absolutely.
get some conversation going between people who identify under the pagan umbrella and those under the Christian umbrella. Anyway, thanks so much for this conversation. And I'm
Deb.
Deb Suttard in Canada.
And I'm Deb
And
Bodwin in, I don't know where I'm.
United States.
United States.
And
Groovy.
I'm Kat the Friendly Witch.
Thank you guys for joining
Lovely.
us today on The Preacher and the Pagan. We hope you'll be back with us next time.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with the Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.